Okay, AMP1 students, in this video we are going to focus on the nucleus, and we're going to learn a little bit more in detail about how it is storing genetic information and how it is controlling protein synthesis. Okay, so first, before we can talk about how the nucleus functions in more detail, we need to understand DNA and RNA and its structure or anatomy. We did cover this when we talked about nucleic acids in chapter 2 when we did the organic macromolecules, and so we're going to just kind of expand on that information a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to go to a picture because our textbook didn't really have a great picture showing the DNA and RNA structure. So these are our nucleic acids, so these are considered organic molecules. They contain carbon, plus they have hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and even phosphorus. So the structure of DNA, I think we've talked about how it's double-stranded. It's a double helix, which essentially is a form that looks like a twisted ladder. And we talked about the base pairs that were part of the structure of DNA, so thymine, adenine, guanine, and cytosine. So one thing we didn't talk about, though, was the building blocks of DNA and RNA. And the building blocks of these nucleic acids are called nucleotides. So nucleotides is the term that we use for the building blocks of our nucleic acids. So just like amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, nucleotides are the building blocks of nucleic acids. So in this image, what they are showing with the DNA structure, we're really simplifying it and looking at just a small section of it. They're showing this is that one side of the DNA molecule, so that's one strand, and then we have this other strand over here. And of course this would be, kind of looks like a ladder. These are the sides of the ladder and these are the rungs of the ladder. But they have flattened it out. It's not twisted in that double helix, but that helps for us to visualize the building blocks of the nucleic acids. So I'm going to kind of circle the structure that is one nucleotide. So one nucleotide, which is here, will include, this is a phosphate, representing a phosphate. This is representing the sugar, deoxyribose. And then this is representing the base called adenine. So those three components make up one nucleotide. And then you can see another nucleotide here, where guanine is the base, and then you can see another one here where thymine is the base. And another one with guanine. So that is a nucleotide. So we get a bunch of nucleotides bonded together, which we have here. And then we get another strand over here. And then remember, they form hydrogen bonds. The bases are complementary. The guanine and cytosine will bond through hydrogen bonding, and the thymine and adenine will. And then that's how we form our DNA molecule. And then RNA, same thing, made up of nucleotides. That's the building blocks. In this case, though, we have a ribose sugar. We do have that phosphate, and then we have the base. Remember, it's single-stranded, so we just have one single strand. So this is the one nucleotide that has cytosine as our base. So remember, this is the one where it doesn't have thymine. Thymine is replaced by uracil. So that was another difference between DNA and RNA that we talked about in chapter 2. Okay, so we need to understand that structure because we're going to talk about how this DNA molecule and the RNA, how they work to store genetic information and then also control the synthesis of proteins. All right. Okay. So in our nucleus is where we find our DNA, the majority of our DNA in the nucleus. And this DNA, whenever the cell is dividing, undergoing mitosis, all that DNA is kind of compacted together into structures called chromosomes. But that they only like kind of get into a compacted state. The DNA kind of coils along, wraps around itself many times to come kind of compacted. It only does that really when mitosis is happening, or cell division. So the rest of the time, we don't want the DNA that compacted. We want it more relaxed and kind of laying out. And so they call that chromatin. So the chromatin in our nucleus is how our DNA normally looks. It just sort of is not as tightly coiled or compacted together. And so what that allows for is easy access to the genes along the DNA. So this is a DNA molecule, and of course it would be much longer, but they're just showing a section of it. And probably genes are going to have be much bigger too, but we'll just pretend like this gene is just made up of this section of the DNA. So along our DNA we have these certain sections that contain genes. So this is like one gene. And if you remember genes, they're important because they will determine what your proteins are in your body, and thus how you look and your characteristics, those kind of things. So that's considered a gene, one section of the DNA. And it's always going to be, we'll have these different order of bases in a particular gene. So in this gene here, the order of the bases are CACT. So that is very specific, and that is essentially the kind of the blueprint for the production of a certain protein. So so maybe this gene we'll say is got the information with these 4 base pairs in this order to make hemoglobin, which is a protein in the body. So another gene somewhere else on the DNA, we'll say on this side since it's different. So this could be the gene for a different protein in the body. So say like actin, which is an important protein molecule in the muscles of our cells, or in our muscle cells. And so it has this particular base sequence, GT, GA, and that will code for a particular protein, in this case actin. So this is the gene that would have the instructions on how to make actin, that protein. So you could look at any section of DNA and there'll be genes along it that have the instructions on making specific proteins in the body. All right, so that's a little bit of overview of the structure of DNA and RNA. And then now we'll start talking about the location of these structures that are going to be involved in this process where our DNA is going to code for a particular protein. So we're going to make proteins, and that's the function of the nucleus, is to control the whole making of the proteins. And it's because of the DNA that's in the nucleus that is controlling that formation of proteins in our bodies. So, okay. All right. We are going to,